There we go.
There you go.
All right. Wow, what an introduction. I think he overstated my qualifications a little bit, but anyway, when I moved to McGuire First Base 2.5 years ago, I had the great honor to meet Mr. Joe O'Donnell. Many of you know him. He's from Style of LaFour, and we've talked together for a long time as I've worked with my students and worked with the young airmen at McGuire. And one of the things that we talked about was, how do we make the POW experience mean something to the current youth of America? And it's always been a difficult thing when you start talking to a youngster, because the first thing they want to know is, well, how were you treated? And we all know how the POWs in Germany were treated, but they do not understand that the experience was not just a physical one. It was also a psychological one and an emotional one. And one of the biggest questions, and I talked to Joe about this on Wednesday, was what is the question that you think is the most difficult to ask, or to be asked? And he stated that he thought that the most difficult question was, this is what I learned from my experience. Our current airmen will most likely not be put in a POW experience, and they know that. My civilian students will not be put in a POW experience. So that's the question that they want answered, is what can you tell them that they will not be able to learn for themselves? And I'd like to give it to our POWs to answer that question. What did you learn from your POW experience that you would not have learned any other way?
I'm a survivor. Surviving. Well, first of all, I got to come from a different attitude, different prospect. I'm in the 15th Air Force. I flew top cover for the 15th Air Force. But I fought two different wars. I mean, to me, it's a different story. When I talk to young people, I tell them in a minute, I'm a damn survivor. I had to be. And I didn't take back anything from anybody. Young and full of tea and vinegar, I had to survive. And my experience, I don't know about anybody else.
No, it's not. All right, we'll use yours. That's a pretty difficult question, because I think that picture that we just saw would indicate the different viewpoints from everyone that was involved in this. The only thing that I might disagree with the film is the part of being a coward about surrendering. We in the Air Force who flew B-17s, and if I may be more personal, we didn't have a hell of a lot of choice. Our plane was to the point that it was not going to go on much further. We're very fortunate to have a pilot who put it on automatic pilot, and with that information about bailing out, we did. It wasn't you had two choices in the B-17. You either stayed aboard and hoped to find out how hellfather it was going to fly, or you bailed out. And what one of those gentlemen had said so aptly, you knew that when you bailed out, you were a prisoner of war. And one of the first things the German interrogator told me was, for you, the war is over. Huh? Yes, and it was a pleasure to hear the word Kriegi, and on behalf of me and my fellow POWs, it feels strange to hear that word again. But that's a tough one for me at any rate. You learn so much. I'll tell you one thing you do learn. You learn survival, and you grow up to be a man in a hell of a big hurry. So we, as POWs, I think if there's anything else we feel, we are thrilled to be here, to be alive, and to be... I thank you.
Is this one working? Hello there, Darky. My experience was a little different. I got shot down August 12th, and my co-pilot and I, 5 of the men had jumped to 4, and 5 of us were with the ship, and we crash landed and took the maps and escape kit, and I pointed that way. That's Spain. And people say, now they say, well, you couldn't expect to walk to Spain, but if you stayed there at the airplane, you were going to be captured right away. We had 2 ME-109s, one on each wing, trying to force us down all of the last hour and a half, and so we started walking, and I'm going to shorten that because it's a long afternoon, but we walked all that day, and I had cut off my trouser leg because I was slightly wounded, like bee stings, not much better war. And that night we were going to stop in a field there. We were shot down at 9:30 in the morning, and a man came up walking a bicycle, and he said, I'll get you in touch with the underground. And he did. We got civilian clothes, and we started towards Spain. We were loose. My co-pilot and I were loose for 21 days. So then we were prisoners of the Gestapo for 4 weeks in solitary before we became a prisoner of war. But that was much worse than any of the Stalags. The SS and the Gestapo were not at all like the Luftwaffe guards. But I learned that you can do almost anything. You can even you can't make a mimeograph machine, but you can make a ditto. And you secretaries remember the ditto, which was the predecessor. You can make anything. You can make pots and pans. You can cook. You can grind a British biscuit up to make flour. And above all, we learned to get along. And I may make some enemies here, but we learned to get along even with the German guards at Stalag Luft 3. Not so much at Moosburg. But we made friends with each other. At Moosburg, we made friends not only with the Americans, we were with South African troops. There were Sikh troops with beards and turbans, and we all learned that you can get along. I don't know of any cases in any of the 3 German camps I was in where any Americans were fighting for food. And of course, we were much better off than in Japan. But that's what I learned. You can get along. First of all, you can stand a lot more than you could, but you can get along with anyone.
You survive.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, next question.
Okay, Chief, this one's for you. When we're looking at pieces of researching information that is not being carried forward, since you have to parse through so many records in order to find the little tidbits to bring the loved ones back home, what pieces of information do you wish were there or habitually seems to be missing that present you with the largest difficulty?
That's a very good question. Has probably a lot of different answers. We use a lot of different resources in our research. We start with missing aircrew reports. That seems to be where everybody started in here. Missing aircrew reports. And in our focus, we focus more on people who are missing. There are 78,000 men still missing from World War II alone. And that's a staggering figure. Where we focus in our little area of our organization is in Central and Eastern Europe. And so we'll track down something with a missing aircrew report, and then we'll identify those members of the crew who never came back, and we'll get their individual deceased personnel files and their Army personnel files. Then we'll tailor our field investigations when we actually go into the country to deal with and to interview people in the area of the crash, in the area of the burials, in the area of the captures, and work out from there. And it's kind of like a small circle where you might start with the mayor of a town, the burgermeister of a town, and they'll introduce you to people who were, at the crash site, or maybe at the burial site, or captured some of these people, and it branches out from there. So we get that. What we would like to have, the American Graves Registration Service, a branch of the Army Quartermaster's Office, after the war, went in looking for a lot of individuals who were buried, who never made it home. They did a lot of field research and investigations on the ground, and their records are nowhere to be found. And with those records, we might be able to solve a lot more cases than what we have. We haven't been able to locate those, so we do without them. That would be our biggest, if I had a wish, a genie in a bottle, that would be the first thing we'd wish for, because that would certainly shed a lot of light on where they're at. It's hard to go to an area 65 years later and go to a cemetery that's not there anymore, or graves that aren't there anymore, and know that 65 years ago somebody was here, maybe looking at the same grave or the same piece of land that you are, maybe even dug up a body and said, no, they're not American, and left the trail there. So that would be the biggest thing. The other thing is what we have in here. Obviously our focus is on missing personnel, but a lot of those missing personnel, Germany and Central Europe especially, may have been prisoners with people like you. And your stories, your accounts, you're shot down, maybe one of your crew members didn't make it back. Those are the kind of things that we need, because any little piece of that puzzle helps us get the bigger picture. I mean, it's just a smaller piece of a bigger puzzle, and you'd be amazed at how things work out sometimes, and how sensibly a little piece of insignificant information might be the case breaker that we need.
I would ask, how many guys here were from the South Compound of Stalag Luft 3? Raise your hands. How many South Compound? One? Holy jumping Toledo.
How many Central?
How many from Central Compound? Stalag Luft 3. How many from North? Anybody from North? East or West? West Compound? One. Son of a gun. No, the reason why I asked, Arnold Wright from Arkansas published a book, Behind the Wire, Stalag Luft 3. All the names of every man in the South Compound. Some guy was given the job by Colonel Clark, or Colonel Spivey. He was going stark raving nuts, and the colonel gave him the job of interviewing every man that came in. And I was interviewed, and it's in here, which denoted that I was injured. The only record that I was injured when I bailed out came down through the trees. And on the basis of this, I received my Purple Heart 2 years ago. Here. Jefferson, Alexander, second lieutenant, airfield near Toulon, France. Oil tank hit, cockpit on fire, bailed out, landed 6 miles from Toulon. Left arm cut, knee cut, injured on landing, captured by the infantry, air medal and so forth. And on the basis of this, I got my Purple Heart. Now this was a record. The guy interviewed me. He had it in script, longhand, and had all of these men's names. Brought it all back. He made that trip, the trip to Springburg and by rail to Stalag 7A, brought it back home, sat in his home, and he died, and his nephew published the book. His nephew published it. And I was just wondering, anybody else here in the South Camp, come up and find your name. Maybe the basis of it. See, this is all part of this business of learning and doing new things, information.
I think he raises an excellent point. He just found out about this 2 years ago. Goes back to something that Doctor, you said in your talk early on. is that what it took you 13 years in order to research your book, you probably could do in 2 or 3 years now that we have the internet. And I'd like you to touch on how we can better use the modern day resources to interconnect, gather, and get this material to a point where not only can the veterans use it, but we can use it to recover and write the future history.
That's an excellent question, and I've got to tell you, age makes a difference here. Technology has come so far so fast. Most of us are in research. Yeah, there we go. We try very hard to get onto these new techniques because they are so productive. Marilyn Walton has done just a marvelous job. A number of other people have. But it's something we're going to have to get on top of because the world is swirling around us and the data is just flying left and right. And unfortunately, a lot of it is uncontrolled and there's no quality control on it. There are two sides to every story. And I think that's another fascinating episode we have yet to hear.
Well, as I say, I was a prisoner of the Gestapo, and they were a different animal. But Hermann Glemnitz was a true German soldier, and we brought him over here to 2 of our reunions. And there was none of this Stockholm syndrome. We never identified with their cause while we were there. But I was doing duty pilot. I would be at the window of the right inside where the German guards would come in from the Vorlager, and I'd have a pad here, and I'd check Glemnitz's in, and then I'd put 2 men to walk around the compound with them. And if they got up near to a place where there was some clandestine operation going on, it might be hammering or something. But by the time they get up to that building, our guard would either yell out, "You're a goon in the block." Later on, that was derogatory. We'd inhale tally-ho. By the time the guard got into the building, we were all knitting. So, but he was strict. He would walk in. He'd say, "You can check me in now, Lieutenant." I mean, it was a grisly game. Everybody knew what was going on, but we're getting rid of sand, but the sand isn't coming out of a building where there's any tunneling. It's from the 3 or 4 buildings. But Popeye was a typical German soldier. He was both of them were World War I veterans, and Popeye was the one who counted us. And his real name was Wilhelm von Lindiner. He was from Rhineland, and after the war, I have a picture of him with my wife, and he's got this out, and he says, "Ich habe meine große Fabrik und 4 Autos." He says, "I own a big factory and 4 cars." And he says, "And wir haben das Krieg verloren." We lost the war. But Popeye was the one that got us that church at Hallbow. And it was bitter cold. I mean, you got thousands of men lying. We were lying spoon to spoon, and there was never any homosexuality at all. It was cold. But there was a little dissension, yelling at first, and Spivey, of whom I can't say enough good things. He was the man. He was flying with us on that mission. I was flying on his wing, and but he could do the right thing with the Germans, and just a remarkable. We kept in touch with each other until he died, and then his wife Jenny was still alive. Not now, but she's dead. But we saw him every 3 or 4 years. Just an unbelievably nice and efficient man. I do have to do a little bit of territorial bragging, though. We spoke of the playing cards, and I brought a deck of the playing card map back there. That was made right here in Cincinnati at the United States Playing Card Company. And we wanted baseball parts. So they came down, the colonel came down here, and a little Ray baseball parts and a little aluminum egg. And he said he went to one of my customers, P. Goldsmith's sons, who made baseballs and golf equipment. Later they became McGregor Goldsmith, and then they were bought out by Brunswick. But it was originally P. Goldsmith's sons, and he came down here and talked to either Phil or Emil Goldsmith. He said, "Why don't you put these strange things in the ball?" And he says, "Oh, we put a lot of strange things in baseballs. They've had some with liquid centers and everything else, but eventually they had." But that's where we got those. The baseballs were put in the box, and that box was marked then. so that when it got over there, the Germans couldn't censor all the packages. We had to have Americans helping censor things, and we had a box that was marked that there's some contraband in there. We had to make sure that the Germans didn't x-ray that particular ball, and we had to make sure that it didn't get over in the compound. They started hitting fly balls with it. But the same way, the playing card companies, the tax stamp was at a diagonal, and we knew then that you soaked the water, put that deck of cards in water and soaked it off, and you had a deck of cards. But I was more, I don't want to say comfortable, but I would rather been walking in the blizzard than I did locked up in those box cars. If you can, you couldn't sit down. Eventually, we had, some of us had had a blanket. We made wire hammocks so we get enough people up. But you're in there. There's a box for a lavatory or other things, and twice I think in those 3 or 4 days they stopped the train, and 1,000 men were out there squatting down along the tracks, and the civilians were all looking. And the Brussels sprout crop along that track was a bumper crop the next year. Sorry about that. Sooner or later you have to use that word, don't you? It happens.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
That's all right.
And, oh, that's fine, that's fine. It comes from a young researcher, and I actually think this is a great question since we have 3 different generations of servicemen here. And it's regarding the Geneva Convention question on whether or not it has any relevance in the modern fight. And since everyone up here has different experiences, I would like your personal opinion, and Chief, we'll start with you.
Geneva Convention nowadays, I mean, we learn a lot about it through our training growing up. In my 21 years, my colleague Teddy Barrios over here, he could probably speak a lot more. He's a 3-year veteran of the Iraq conflict. I think nowadays you're dealing with enemies, and this started back during Vietnam. You're dealing with enemies that don't play by the same rules we do, and therefore the Geneva Convention kind of goes out the window. Whereas a prisoner nowadays, if you're a prisoner in Iraq or Afghanistan, you don't have the same kind of chances that these gentlemen had, for survival. It's not to say you're gone or it's a lost cause for you, but it's definitely not the same as it used to be. Oh, yeah. And that's the biggest battle our troops nowadays face. Is before, these guys all airmen, all shot down, all captives of the German government. They had their struggles, they had their good days and their bad days, but there was that kind of blanket of safety, that security blanket of sorts. Whereas today, and even back upwards to Vietnam, and even some in Korea, that's pretty much gone away. You have to play by, in order to follow the rules, you have to play by the rules, and the enemies we're facing nowadays don't play by the rules at all.
Can I speak to that? If you're fighting a guy and you have the rules, you respect each other, it's a different story. Geneva Accord. But here's a guy who wants to go to Allah, but he wants to take you along with him. How do you fight a guy like that? Do you give him the rights of the Supreme Court when you capture him? And if you turn him loose, he turns right around, he's going to shoot you when you walk out of the courtroom. So my idea, shoot the son of a gun.
As far as uniformed military personnel, I still cherish the Geneva Accord. I don't think we can lower ourselves to the other enemy standards. And I know you're going to say, well, if torturing this one man will save 1,000, I don't buy it. I think a lot of information, I know you'll say they can get the information out of you. I think a lot of information that's gained by torture is false. I say we have to keep the Geneva Convention.
Well, let me just say what in my particular case, I found that the Geneva Convention for the German government, for example, that we lived under, is good only, as some gentlemen have said, that they abide by it. Now, let me give you an example. We've had the pleasure once of having a Red Cross representative who is his duty to visit some prisoner of war camps to see that they are being adhered to according to the Geneva Convention rules. Well, when the German camp knew that they were coming, man, we got fresh blankets. We got a stove that was lit. We had food on the table. It was an excellent, and unfortunately, if they had left us alone with that Red Cross representative, we could have told them the truth. But with him was several German guards, and every time he would ask the question, "Gentlemen, is this something you just got, or is this something you live?" Well, of course, no, we've had this all the while. So again, I believe in that Geneva Convention because in a lot of respect it kept me alive. Now, there was one other thing. The Red Cross sent us parcels, a Red Cross parcel dedicated to ex-prisoners of war. When we were liberated in Stalag Luft I, we, as the picture so aptly depicted, we celebrated loudly and long. We went into a warehouse where they had all their equipment. We found hundreds and hundreds of boxes of our Red Cross parcels. So, again, there was a rule. They were to give those to us. We determined that probably those Red Cross parcels were better than what they were being served. So on my behalf, I thank you very much. I confirm in it, if you can get the enemy we're fighting to go along with it. I thank you.
Well, Lindiner did, but at Stalag Luft III, we ran out of parcels several times. We ran out, I think, in September, October 44. So it was very slim eating for a month. The only thing you thought of was food. But November, we got, I think, 18,000 Red Cross parcels. Railroads was moving, so we had a really deluxe Christmas. We had more than we needed to eat. And when the Russians were coming, those parcels were there, and we were allowed to make packs out of a pair of trousers and take, they let us open the Red Cross parcels. Popeye got them to open them, and we could load up with food and everything, and particularly there's cigarettes in a Red Cross parcel, and cigarettes are currency anywhere in the world, particularly American cigarettes. So one of the big things you miss as a prisoner is your free will. At the start of the war, when things were tough, it was limited as to how many squares of toilet paper you were going to get. And under the Geneva Accord, I'll hurry it up, you're paid by the holding company scale, and in Stalag Luft III, as I remember, we elected to take that money and spread it out among all the prisoners to buy toilet paper and soap and toothpaste and stuff like that. And we elected to include the RAF people in it because their country was deducting the lead's German pay from their pay, where the Americans, we were paid, we never saw any money, but theoretically we were paid. And the German records, they were still keeping records how many bedboards we stole because they were keeping records for tunnel damage they were going to charge us after the war.
Now, the good news is, just recently I read a very extensive review by 3 young German historians, and they said, the review said, this is so refreshing because it appears that the younger generation of scholars is finally ready to overcome what has always been known as the German question, and that is, why did they do what they did? And they don't try to answer that question as much as they go back in and say, but out of all of this, out of all of these ashes, there are some good things to be said as well. And I would very, very much like to encourage young scholars here to pursue that whole avenue and see how this story fleshes out.